That would be exactly. This meeting is being recorded, so I hope that's okay with everyone. This is just so that we can put it later on our website, and we'll be following this up with a policy brief, so it's for that. To get us started, namaste everyone, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I am Isha, the Management Associate for the Nepal Policy Institute. I will be today's moderator, so thank you all for joining us. To get started, I would like to go on with a couple of housekeeping points. Again, this is being recorded. Please mute your audio, and we have an active chat section, so please definitely use that. This is also to remind you that towards the end, we also have 15 to 20 minutes of time for you to directly ask questions to our panelists. So definitely look forward to that. We would like to invite everyone to be open-minded here, because this is a very important discussion we're about to have. And having said that, I will move towards introducing our panelists. First, we have Mahalakshmiji. She is the General Secretary to the Executive Committee of APANET Nepal. She's received the Best Entrepreneur Award for 2014 by the Ministry of Industry in Nepal. Moving on, we have Akriti, who's a journalist from the Kathmandu Post. She covers social affairs, focusing on women's rights, climate change, and LGBTQIA issues. And then finally, we have Ajitji here, who identifies as a queer person and embraces the concept of gender fluidity. He's a current student of economics, political science, and theater in Illinois in the US. So having said that, we would like to get started with the webinar. So with that, I would like to start with Mahalakshmiji. As a woman in the sector of entrepreneurship in the context of Nepal, which is a very new area, could you venture us into how this experience has been for you? Over to you. Sorry, I think you're muted, Mahalakshmiji. Could you unmute yourself?
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Mahalakshmi Shrestha. I'm General Secretary of Federation of Women Entrepreneurs Association of Nepal, Mahila Udyami Mahasangh. I have been in this entrepreneur sector for almost 3 decades, starting with a small business and now gradually associated with this FWIN and sharing my knowledge and experiences with other women entrepreneurs throughout the country. Our federation has 57 district chapters, so we are linked with women entrepreneurs all over Nepal. So our main objectives of this organization is women empowerment through entrepreneurship development. So that's it for the introduction.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, over to you.
I'd like to go to Akriti, and if you could very generally speak about your experience as a journalist in Kathmandu Post, and why specifically were you motivated to cover the following issues that we've identified in the beginning?
Thank you so much for the question, Nishaji. I've been working for 6 months now as a journalist at the Kathmandu Post, and to be honest, I love my job, and that's because I love writing, and I get to talk to a lot of people here in Nepal, and I get to know what's actually happening at the ground level. Before I move on to answering why this field, I would just want to mention that the work that Mahalakshmiji does at her organization is so amazing. I just finished a piece on post-pandemic and ever since the pandemic, and how digitization and how digitization was so important in youth entrepreneurship. So the work that they've done is extremely amazing. So I just wanted to address that. Apart from that, why I choose this is because it feels a lot of the issues that come out in Nepal, it feels extremely personal. And I think one of the most striking moments for me was whenever any issue happens, as a woman, you're constantly, you remember, you feel that it could easily have been you, that person, whoever is facing that sort of atrocity, that sort of discrimination, inequality, that could easily have been you. And that just motivates me further to write on these things. But then also another striking moment during that conversation was when my cishet male friends, upper caste, what they said was that whenever they see these issues, their first instinct is like, oh, that could never be me. So this sort of huge burden and privileges that two distinct sort of group of people, despite living in similar circumstances, this inequality really motivates me, and that is why I cover these issues. Yeah.
Thank you. And that's a very good segue to Ajitji, who identifies as a queer person in the context of Nepal, where the binary sector and binary understanding of gender is very prevalent. And Ajitji, we've watched your video. We've all been very inspired. And I wanted to ask you to venture a little bit into that area in whatever way you feel comfortable.
धेरै धन्यवाद। म अजित शर्मा। म चाहिँ अहिले मेक्सिकोमा छु। मेरो स्प्रिङ ब्रेक सुरु भएको भएर चाहिँ एक किसिमले घुम्न आएको थिएँ एक हप्तालाई चाहिँ। सो आइ एम लाइक अल द वे अन द अदर पार्ट अफ द वर्ल्ड। म चाहिँ सानैदेखि एउटा हाम्रो समाजमा आइरहेको एउटा परिवेश अनुसार चाहिँ महिला यस्तो हुनुपर्छ, पुरुष यस्तो हुनुपर्छ भन्ने खालको धारणामा चाहिँ पर्दिन थिएँ हैन। सिसजेन्डर पुरुष भएर जन्मिए पनि, मलाई समाजले इंकित गरे पनि, मलाई चाहिँ जहिले पनि सूक्ष्म रूपमा चाहिँ महिलालाई मनपर्ने खालको कुराहरू मन पर्थ्यो। अनि त्यसपछि गएर हुर्कदै गर्दाखेरि पनि मैले आफूमा चाहिँ धेरै किसिमको भिन्नता पाएँ हैन। नर्मली समाजमा हुने महिला पुरुषको बाइनरी आइडेन्टिटी भन्दा पनि। अनि त्यसपछि गएर मलाई चाहिँ पुरुष भएर पनि मलाई पुरुषले मन पर्न थाल्यो। त्यसपछि शारीरिक, मानसिक, भावनात्मक रूपमा चाहिँ। अनि त्यसले गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ त्यो बाइनरी आइडेन्टिटी भन्दा बाहिर पर्दाखेरि चाहिँ मलाई चाहिँ अलि गाह्रो भएको थियो हुर्किदाखेरि चाहिँ। तर मेरो साथीभाइ अनि त्यसपछि गएर इष्टमित्र परिवारले गर्दाखेरि पनि धेरै हदसम्म सहयोग पुग्यो र साथसाथै मलाई आफूलाई चाहिँ त्यो जर्नीबाट चाहिँ मैले एक किसिमको एउटा हौसला दिन सके आफैलाई हैन। अनि साथसाथै गएर अब धेरै खादिएका भावनाहरू र धेरै खुम्चिएका मेरा मनका कुण्ठाहरू चाहिँ एक किसिमको मानसिक समस्या भएर पनि निस्कियो एकताकामा हैन। मलाई धेरै गाह्रो भयो त्यो हो। र त्यही हो, मैले जेन्डर बाइनरीले चाहिँ मान्छेलाई चाहिँ एउटा सिस्टम, चलिआएको सिस्टम भन्दा बाहिर सोच्न दिदैन हैन। मैले भन्न मेरो चाहिँ तर्क के हो भन्दाखेरि कुनै सिस्टमलाई डिसमेन्टल गर्नु छ भने, कुनै सिस्टम मन परेको छैन भने त्यो सिस्टम फलो गर्नु नै त्यो सिस्टमलाई झन् सहयोग गर्नु हो। त्यो सिस्टमलाई कम्प्लिटली अब्यान्डन गर्नु नै त्यो सिस्टमको डिसमेन्टलिङको हाम्रो अगाडि लाग्नु नै त्यही नै हो लाग्छ मलाई चाहिँ।
Thank you, Ajitji. That is very well put together. The dismantling of the system, what really is the system? That definitely is the question we are trying to unpack here. And both Akritiji, Ajitji, and Mahalakshmiji have been hinting towards this term of intersectionality, this idea of different identities of ours, be it personal, be it social, be it political, coming together and giving us this either privilege or in some way keeping us behind. Having groups or people being discriminated is something that we're looking forward to discovering, first coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, intersectionality. So this brings me to Akritiji. In the general context of gender equality that we're having this webinar, this debate, what does intersectionality mean to you in your personal experience or in your professional experience?
Thank you so much for the question. So intersectionality to me is about what are the various identities that we associate with and we identify with. So when we talk about identities, gender ko kura garyौं. Gender pani, it's not just male and female, as Ajit said. And we talk about gender, and then we have our sexual orientation, where one can be lesbian, gay, trans, intersex, queer. So त्यो भयो अनि त्यो सँगसँगै हाम्रो क्लासको कुरा आउँछ. Which class do we belong to? What is our economic source in? हामी दिनदिनै hand to mouth ले बाँचिरहेको छौं कि do we have a good set of assets that we can live off with? And then there comes caste. So which caste do we belong to? Are we Khas Arya Brahmins? Are we Kshatris? Are we Newars? Are we Janjati भनेको छ कि indigenous भनेको छ कि मधेसी छ कि दलित छ? So when we talk about And also more than that, it's also about where are you geographically located, because the experiences of a Khosari individual in Kathmandu might be different than a Khosari individual who's living, say, in Doilik. So, but despite that, they are privileged in terms of caste. And talking about intersectionality in a way where we understand all of these tiny little nuances, just like for me, growing up as a Khos Arya Brahmin woman, Newar bhaneko एउटा huge term थियो के. But then only until I met a friend of mine who belonged to a lower caste Newar did I realize कि Newar caste भित्र पनि hierarchy हुन्छ भनेर के. So, or recognizing that when we talk about Madhesi people, we have Madhesi Dalit people as well. So having these sort of tiny nuances and recognizing that it's there, but how do we make sure that we distribute the power that we hold? Democracy, it fosters best when the power is distributed among every single individual in the society, Nita. So how do we do that, and how do we bring in everyone in the mainstream sort of narrative, So that is what I feel what intersectionality is. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much, Akriti ji. So, with the context you've given, I'd like to move to Mahalakshmi ji. As a woman in a sector of entrepreneurship or business, how has that affected you, especially given our, social condition, even back in your days when women were not, basically seen out there in the job employment sector, and for you to start your own business, what was that experience like? Could you venture us into that, please?
Thank you, Isha ji. Yeah, मैले चाहिँ नि मेरो entrepreneurship journey आज भन्दा 28 वर्ष अगाडि स्टार्ट गरेको हो, हैन? त्यो बेलाको यो सोसाइटीको माइन्डसेट इज डिफरेन्ट, हैन? वुमेनहरुलाई मेरो बेलामा, मेरो फ्यामिलीमा भनौं, मेरो सराउन्डिङमा एजुकेसनको लागि चाहिँ नि वुमेनहरुलाई एक्सेस थियो, पढाउँथ्यो मेरो सिचुएसनमा। तर काम गर्ने बेला चाहिँ नि उनीहरुलाई माइन्डसेट के थियो भने वुमेनहरु भएर घर राम्ररी चलाउनु पर्छ, घर हेर्नु पर्छ, त्यो पढाइ भनेको सेकेन्डरी इम्पोर्टेन्स जस्तो कि। अनि पढिसकेपछि पनि के गर्ने भन्ने कुरा चाहिँ नि त्यो हामीलाई घरमा हेर्नेमा बढी हेर्नु पर्छ भन्ने किसिमबाट ग्रुम गरेर ल्याएको हो। तर इन द कोर्स अफ टाइम हुँदै जाँदाखेरि मैले पढ्दाखेरि मलाई चाहिँ एउटा कुरा के रियलाइज थियो भने वुमेनहरु इकोनोमिकली इन्डिपेन्डेन्ट नभएसम्म उनीहरुलाई चाहिँ सोशल स्ट्याटस चाहिँ उनीहरुको एकदमै अप्ठ्यारो पर्छ भन्ने कुरा चाहिँ मैले रियलाइज गरिसकेको थिएँ। त्यसैले इन्डिपेन्डेन्ट हुनुपर्छ र पढ्नुपर्छ भन्ने कुरा चाहिँ नि मेरो भित्रदेखि नै आएको कुरा हो, हैन? तर डिस्क्रिमिनेसन चाहिँ नि एभ्री वुमनले डिफरेन्ट स्टेज अफ लाइफमा जहिले पनि भोगि नै राखेको हुन्छ जस्तो लाग्छ मलाई अहिले हेर्दाखेरि। किनभने जुन किसिमको डिस्क्रिमिनेसन हामी पाएको थियो त्यो बेला हामी रियली डिस्क्रिमिनेट भइरहेको छौं कि छैन भन्ने कुरामा पनि वी डोन्ट नो। डिस्क्रिमिनेसन हो भन्ने कुरा पनि थाहा हुँदैन थियो कि हामीलाई। त्यो त नर्मल जस्तो कि अब हाम्रो माइन्डसेट पनि डिस्क्रिमिनेसन हो होइन भन्ने छुटाउन सक्ने किसिमको थिएन। सोसाइटीले जे कुरा हाम्रो दिमागमा राखेको छ त्यो कुरा दिमागमै भइराख्ने थियो, हैन? तर हामीले अब के गर्यो भने बिस्तारै अब यो एन्टरप्रेन्योरशिप जर्नीमा जाँदाखेरि धेरैसो वुमेन एन्टरप्रेन्योरलाई के छ भने एकदमै गाह्रो छ कि स्टार्ट गर्नलाई पहिला, हैन? अब गभर्नमेन्टको पोलिसी पनि त्यो बेला त वुमेनहरुलाई इन्करेजिङ गर्ने खालको पोलिसी पनि थिएन। यदि मेरो स्टार्ट गरेको फिल्ड भनेको एकदमै डिफरेन्ट, बी किपिङ, हनी भन्दाखेरि त्यो बेला यो एकदमै के कुरामा स्टार्ट गर्दैछ मेरो छोरी जस्तो कि के गर्दैछ भन्ने जस्तो थियो। तर मलाई चाहिँ नि अलिकति कन्फिडेन्स भइसकेको थियो। मैले जुन किसिमको एक्सपोजर पाएँ त्यो सेक्टरमा पनि केही गर्न सक्छ भन्ने कुरा कन्फिडेन्स मलाई आइसकेको थियो। तर यस्तो कुरा के छ भने अहिले हामीले वुमन एन्टरप्रेन्योरलाई हेर्दाखेरि के हुन्छ भने सबभन्दा पहिला अब हाम्रो कस्तो छ भने कन्स्टिट्युसनमा त के छ भने अब प्रोपर्टी राइट्सको कुरा, हैन? अब फाइनान्शियल राइट्सको कुराहरू इक्वल छ भन्ने कुरा ग्यारेन्टी गरेको छ भन्ने कुराहरू आउँछ। तर वुमेनहरुका काम सुरु गर्नलाई फर्स्ट अफ अल उनीहरुको फाइनान्शियली नै उनीहरुलाई एक्सेस हुँदैन के जसलाई पनि काम सुरु गर्नलाई। कसरी सुरु गर्ने त कुनै काम सुरु गर्ने हो भने उनीहरु त्यसको लागि अब बैंकमा जाउँ, अब वुमेनहरुलाई प्रपर्टी हुँदैन, कोल्याटरल राख्न सक्दैन, त्यसले गर्दाखेरि फाइनान्स जुराउन एकदमै गाह्रो हुन्छ। अनि त्यसमा पनि अब तपाईहरुले भन्नुभएको जस्तै अहिले यो इन्टरसेक्सुअलिटीको कुरा, अब म काठमाडौँको महिलालाई यस्तो किसिमको प्रब्लम थियो त्यो बेला काम सुरु गर्दाखेरि, मैले पनि कुनै पनि सपोर्ट माग्न सक्ने अवस्था थिएन। तर अब म भन्दा अब अझ गाउँको रुरल वुमेनलाई झन् त्यो समस्या अझ कस्तो थियो होला, कसैले त अब त्यो मल्टिपल फर्म अफ डिस्क्रिमिनेसन फेस गरिरहेको हुन्छ नि, कस्तो अब दलित पनि भइरहेको हुन्छ, जियोग्राफिकल्ली पनि अलि रुरल एरियामा हुर्किरहेको हुन्छ हैन, क्लासले पनि उसलाई अलिकति तल परिरहेको, यस्तो कुरालाई चाहिँ नि अहिले आएर चाहिँ नि सबैले एड्रेस गर्नुपर्छ जस्तो लाग्छ कि। अनि अब गभर्नमेन्टले अहिले पोलिसीहरू जुन जेन्डर इक्वालिटीको पोलिसीहरू जुन किसिमको बनाइरहेको छ नि, त्यसमा अब जेन्डर इक्वालिटी भन्दा अलिकति ब्रडर एक्सपेक्टमा हामीले समेटेर यसमा यो अरू इन्टरसेक्सुअलिटीको कुराहरू जस्तो अब कास्ट क्लास, अघि आकृतिजीले सबै एकदमै क्लियरली भन्नुभयो हैन, यो जेन्डर ओरिएन्टेसनका कुराहरू सबै कुरालाई एड्रेस गर्ने खालको चाहिँ नि पोलिसी मा चाहिँ नि इन्टिग्रेट गरेर लग्यो भने हामीले अलि इन्क्लुसिभ सोसाइटी डेभलप गर्नलाई चाहिँ नि सपोर्टिभ पोलिसी चाहिन्छ जस्तो लाग्छ हामीलाई। थ्याङ्क यू।
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mahalakshmiji. You brought up a lot of different sectors of intersectionality where women have been facing problems, but it is very important to point out that in this context, at least there is awareness. Women are discriminated and people in Nepal have that awareness and we are speaking about it. But one sector that is definitely unspoken about is the Lgbtqia community, be it because of our traditions, because of the patriarchal roots we have in our country. So I would want to hear from Ajitji in terms of his experiences, be it in school, how were things for you? You know, in a Nepali context, you are a man, so, you know, there is that power dynamic, but at the same time, being a queer person, how has that affected you in the context of Nepal? And if you could compare that experience to the ones you're having right now, we would really be grateful for that. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. While growing up, everything was like very heteronormative, हैन? सबै बेसम यौनिक महिला वा पुरुषको लागि भनेर बनाइएको छ नै समाजमा हरेक खालको कुराहरू पनि, हैन? अनि त्यसपछि एक अर्थमा हामी एकदमै अल्पसंख्यक भएको कारणले गर्दाखेरि पनि होला, हाम्रो लागि चाहिँ धेरै पहिलो कुरा त उपनिवेशको कारणले गर्दाखेरि भएका ऐतिहासिक कुराहरू पनि सबै उखेलिएर गयो, हैन? सकियो। अनि त्यसपछि गएर साथसाथै अब त्यही खालको बेसम यौनिक सामाजिक परिवेशमा रहँदै गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ ती भएका कुराहरू पनि हरायो के अनि, हैन? त्यसले गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ अहिलेको पुस्तालाई त जसले चाहिँ बोल्न खोजिरहेको छ, जसले अगाडि आउन खोजिरहेको छ, उनीहरूलाई पनि एक किसिमको गाह्रो भएकै छ, हैन? अनि साथसाथै गएर त्यही माथि मान्छेहरूले नबुझेर पनि एकदमै गाह्रो हुन्छ, हैन? आकृतिले भनेको जस्तै इन्टरसेक्सनालिटी चाहिँ मेरो लागि चाहिँ मेरो यौनिकता, हैन? मेरो जात, मेरो वर्ण, मेरो सामाजिक क्लास, सोशल क्लास, यी सबै कुराहरूको सम्मिश्रण हो, हैन? अनि साथसाथै गएर र मेरो सुविधा के छ त, हैन? मैले हुर्कदाखेरि मैले समाजमा के खालको सुविधा प्रिभिलेजेसहरू पाएको छु त, हैन? त्यो कुराहरू पनि चिन्तन गर्नु चाहिँ एक किसिमको इन्टरसेक्सनालिटीको चाहिँ एकदमै मुख्य पार्ट हो जस्तो लाग्छ मलाई, हैन? अनि अब नन बाइनरीको कुरा आउँदाखेरि चाहिँ मलाई चाहिँ आफूलाई चाहिँ मेरो पहिचान अनुसार चाहिँ मलाई कहिलेकाहीँ चाहिँ मैले चाहिँ यौनिक स्पेशली लैङ्गिक पहिचानलाई चाहिँ एउटा बक्समा राखेर चाहिँ हेर्न चाहिँ खोज्दिन के, हैन? ए ल मलाई त समाजले जन्मदाखेरि चाहिँ पुरुषको यौनाङ्गमा जन्मेको हो, तिमी पुरुषको जस्तो हाम्रो सामाजिक परिवेशमा चलिआएको पुरुषको जस्तै व्यवहार देखाऊ, यस्तै खालको लुगा लगाऊ, यस्तै खालको लवाई खवाई होस् तिम्रो भन्ने खालको चाहिँ मलाई लाग्दैन कि, हैन? किनकि समाजमा बनाएका हरेक चिज त एउटा कन्स्ट्रक्सन हो नि त, हैन? जेन्डर भनेको परफर्मेन्स हो के। अनि त्यसपछि गएर ती कुरा चाहिँ मैले आफैले डिफाई गर्न पनि सक्छु, किनकि म जस्तै खालका मान्छेले बनाएका हुन्, हैन? मलाई मन लाग्यो भने मैले अपनाउन पनि सक्छु, हैन? मेरो त्यही भएर म त नन बाइनरी आइडियाजको चाहिँ एकदम ठुलो एडभोकेट भन्छु आफूलाई, हैन? आफूले चलिआएको परिवेश भन्दा चाहिँ आफूलाई जेमा कम्फर्टेबल बढी फिल हुन्छ नि त्यहीमा नै आफूलाई ढाल्न सक्नु चाहिँ नन बाइनरी आइडेन्टिटीको चाहिँ मुख्य पार्ट हो जस्तो लाग्छ मलाई.
Thank you, Ajit. So right now, the basic theme of the conversation follows on the traditional patriarchal idea, the idea of heteronormity that we've picked up. So at this point, I mean, what kind of measures can be taken, to address this root problem, I would say, because we do live in a traditional patriarchal society and things have not changed much. I mean, things are changing, yes, but is it in the pace that we want? That is a question that remains up for discussion. And this definitely is not about this happened in the past and we're much more better off right now. So, having said that, Akriti ji, I wanted you to speak in terms of, as a journalist, we are speaking about the root problems of gender equality, not just in the context of discrimination, but violence, even more so in the news right now. So I was wondering what is something that you face both on a personal and a professional level going into this context of root causes, and what can be done? Can anything be done? Over to you.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
We hear you, yeah.
Okay, I'm so sorry, I kind of lost connection for a minute. So I think I'd like to start with a sort of anecdote that I wanted to share to highlight how not intersectional our whole system is. So मेरो घर चाहिँ सुनसरी and every दशैं हामी घर जान्थ्यौं अनि I had a neighbor कि मधेसी चौधरीको family हैन. So her and I similar age जहिले सँगै खेल्ने. I studied Kathmanduमा, she studied उतै सुनसरीमा. And then what happened was I went back when I was 21 अनि university यताउति, so for a long time I didn't go back. And when I went back when I was 21, she was married. She studied grade 10 samma. I studied grade 10 samma, but she belonged to a Chaudhary community and she was in Sunsari, but I was out and I was still pursuing my further studies. She was married to a 25-year-old who was out in a Gulf country working. So भनेपछि हाम्रो education systemले, as much as it says it's going to empower women, it's going to give women all of these sort of financial freedom, we're failing, Nita. We're clearly failing where duita women who technically have roots in similar places couldn't actually go out and make it in the world. And उसले simple मलाई राखेर भनेको थियो कि म गाउँमा जाँदा म अहिले यो जुन सुरुवाल लाइरहेको छु यो पनि लाउन पाउँदैन, जहिले धोती लाउनु पर्छ. हामीले बुक्सहरुमा पढ्दाखेरि घुम्टो प्रथा छैन भन्छ, तर once I go back to my home, घुम्टो प्रथा कति छ त मलाई पनि थाहा छैन नि भनेर भन्छ के. So in that, if we're talking about all of these things, the intersectionality को त्यो patriarchal structures हामीले कति पनि break गरेको त रहेनछ नि त. So where do we move ahead भन्दाखेरि we will have to re-evaluate every single thing. And when we do that, Nepalko context ma, we cannot dismiss caste. We cannot just make it a gender issue. Okay? This is a society where Brahminical patriarchy is such a huge thing. And Brahminical patriarchy, it's not just ki Madhesi Dalit women who are at the cost of it, who are at the receiving end of it. It's also Khasariya women who are constantly having to reinforce the very same strict practices. Thus the menstrual exclusion ke practices ma herda, upper caste Brahminical families, these practices are so much more strict than all indigenous communities go. And over the years, what we're seeing is that indigenous communities, upper caste families, yo practices emulate garirako cha. Bhanepachi, dealing with these sort of problems comes with actually addressing our society's structure ke cha ta. And then perhaps moving ahead from that, understanding ki, okay, hamro caste pani cha, gender pani cha, then how do we move beyond these, beyond yako you sort of hierarchy banera ke? Yeah.
Thank you, Akriti. This brings us to a very, important junction where we have the social norms that we have, and we also have, the government agenda to try to work towards gender equality, not just nationally, but internationally as well. We have the Sustainable Development Goals that is very much committed to reduce violence against women, violence against the Lgbtqia community, to work towards gender equality. And in doing that, the government has taken steps in terms of, introducing the quota system. And as you rightly mentioned, Akriti, there is a discrepancy between the law and implementation, and we do not necessarily know much, or we only know about the political sector. So Mahalakshmi ji did touch on it before when she was speaking, so I wanted her to speak in terms of business where women are not even considered. You did speak about how there was no access to economic needs to develop themselves. How have things changed, Mahalakshmi ji? And in your role as an executive director, what are the things that you impart on the young emerging women entrepreneurs, and how do we go forward from there?
Thank you, Isha ji. Yeah, if we look at the government policy मा त ग्यारेन्टी गरेको हुन्छ नै छ पनि है पोलिसी हेर्दाखेरि वुमेनहरुलाई हरेक चीजमा ग्यारेन्टी गरेछ इक्वल राइट्स को कुरा गरेको छ तर इन प्र्याक्टिकल कुरा डिफरेन्ट छ प्र्याक्टिकलमा के छ भने अब गभर्नमेन्टहरुले प्रोग्रामहरु गर्दाखेरि पनि अब वुमेनहरुलाई इन्क्लुसिभ गर्नुपर्छ भन्छ तर काम हुने बेलामा चाहिँ नि अब यो टार्गेट मिट गर्नलाई मात्र काम गर्ने जस्तो हुन्छ हैन तर एक्चुअली चाहिँ नि अब यो एकदमै यो वुमेनहरुले एकदमै एक्टिभली हैन मिनिङफुल्ली कुनै पनि प्रोग्राममा पार्टिसिपेट गराउने किसिमको हामीसँग प्रोभिजन छैन त्यो खाली टार्गेट मिट गर्नलाई मात्र गर्ने भएको कारणले पनि चेन्जेसहरु त्यति सजिलै हुन सक्दैन अब वुमेनहरुलाई पहिला अब बिजनेसको पर्सपेक्टिभमा हेर्दाखेरि अझ गाह्रो कुराहरु छ यो कुराहरुमा हामीले पनि एकदमै एफिनले पनि धेरै लबी गरेको कुरा हो हामीले फेस गरेको प्रब्लम हो जस्तो कि अब कोल्याटरल नहुने कुरामा स्टार्ट गरौँ हैन महिलाहरुको फाइनान्समा एक्सेस नहुने कुरा एक्सेस छैन बिजनेस स्टार्ट गर्नलाई बिजनेस ग्रो गर्नको लागि त्यो एकदमै इम्पोर्टेन्ट पार्ट हो मेलहरुले चाहिँ नि जताबाट पनि ल्याउन सक्छ भने फिमेलहरुलाई त्यो कुरामा एक्सक्लुडै छ त्यो कारणले गर्दाखेरि हामीले गभर्नमेन्टहरुसँग लबी गरे हैन वुमेनहरुलाई सब्सिडाइज लोन चाहियो कोल्याटरल फ्री लोन चाहियो भन्ने कुरामा हामीले एकदमै गभर्नमेन्टसँग एडभोकेसी गरेर गभर्नमेन्टले प्रोग्राम ल्याएर अहिले अब प्रोग्राम इम्प्लिमेन्ट पनि भयो इम्प्लिमेन्ट भएर अहिले यो प्रोग्रामले अब अहिले हामीले डेटा हेर्ने हो भने 65,000 वुमन एन्टरप्रेन्योर्सहरुले कोल्याटरल फ्री सब्सिडाइज लोन एक्सेस गरेको छ भन्ने कुरा छ रेकर्डमा हैन तर हामीलाई के कुरा थाहा छैन भने अब यो लोन कस्तो वुमेनहरुले पायो त साच्चै नै वुमेनहरुले पाइरहेको छ त यो वुमेनको नाममा मेलले फाइदा लिइरहेछ कि न अथवा यो के शहरको वुमेनहरुले मात्र पाइरहेको छ रुरल वुमेनहरुले पाएकै छैन किनभने अब हामीले एउटा रिसर्च गर्दाखेरि के छ भने अब रुरल वुमेनहरुलाई त यो कोल्याटरल फ्री लोन्सको बारे फर्स्ट अफ अल त कति समयसम्म यसको बारे इन्फर्मेसनै छैन इन्फर्मेसन पनि एउटा ठूलो ग्याप हो कि वुमेनहरुलाई प्रोग्राम बनाएको हुन्छ वुमेनहरुलाई के प्रोजेक्टहरु आइरहेको हुन्छ तर वुमेनहरु जसको लागि त्यो आइरहेछ उसलाई नै त्यसको बारे इन्फर्मेसन हुँदैन है त्यो ठूलो ग्याप हुन सक्छ त्यसले गर्दाखेरि मान्छेहरुलाई एक्सक्लुड गरिदिन्छ त्यो बेनिफिट पाउनबाट अब कस्तो छ भने अब पायो इन्फर्मेसन सपोज कसैले पायो भने इन्फर्मेसन पाए तापनि उले त्यो एक्सेस गर्न सक्दैन किनभने त्यसमा चाहिने जुन यो बिजनेस प्लान डेभलप गर्नुपर्ने फर एक्जाम्पल हैन अरु डकुमेन्टेसनको कामहरु उनीहरुलाई सहज छैन उलाई त्यो गर्नलाई पनि कोही अर्को थर्ड पर्सनसँग एसेस लिनुपर्ने कि उले आफै गर्न नसक्ने हैन अब रुरल वुमेनहरु यो बैंकको सेटअपमा बैंकमा गएर आफूलाई चाहिने कुरा गर्नलाई नै हिचकिचाहट हुने के बैंकको मान्छेहरुसँग कुरा गर्न पनि उनीहरु नसक्ने नि गाह्रो हुन्छ उनीहरुलाई जानुहुन्छ भन्ने कुरा पनि थाहा हुँदैन त्यस्तो सेटअपमा त्यस्तो प्रोग्रामहरु आइरहेछ अब हामीले के कुरामा हामीले अलिकति मोनिटर गर्नु पर्यो भने यस्तो प्रोग्रामहरु आउँदाखेरि के यो महिलाले सबै बेनिफिट पाइरहेछ त यो टार्गेटेड ग्रुपले पाइरहेको त यो कहाँनिर इम्प्लिमेन्टेसनमा कुनै सर्ट कमिङ छ कि पोलिसी सेल्फमा छ कि हैन अब त्यो चाहिने मान्छेले एक्चुअली बेनिफिट पाइरहेको छ कि छैन यदि पाइरहेको छैन भने कस्तो किसिमको सपोर्ट मेकानिजम हामीले डेभलप गर्यो भने त्यो सबै वुमेनहरुले त्यो प्रोग्रामलाई एक्सेस गर्न सक्छ हैन त्यो कुराहरुमा चाहिँ नि हामीले अलिकति ध्यान दिएर उले पाउन सक्ने किसिमको प्रोग्रामहरु बनाउनु पर्यो अनि उसको चाहिँ नि क्यापेसिटी पनि डेभलप गरिदिनु पर्यो किनभने त्यो प्रोग्राम पाउनलाईको पनि उसको पनि त क्यापेसिटी डेभलप हुनु पर्यो नि यसरी गर्यो भने के हुन्छ भने यो जुन किसिमको ग्याप छ नि यो डिस्क्रिमिनेसनहरु भनेको अब कुनै पनि वुमेन पनि हैन अथवा अरु कोही पनि सोसाइटीमा उनीहरू यदि यो इकोनोमिकली इम्पावर भयो भने एक किसिमबाट उनीहरूलाई सोसाइटीमा स्ट्याटसलाई नि चेन्ज गरिदिन्छ त्यो दिस इज वान अफ द वे हैन त्यो चेन्जलाई अलिकति छिटो गर्नको लागि एउटा त अब पोलिसीमै चेन्जहरू ल्याउनै पर्छ यो सबैलाई समेट्ने किसिमको तर पोलिसीमा ल्याएर पनि पोलिसीले कतिको इफेक्टिभली काम गरिरहेको छ छैन भन्ने मोनिटर गर्ने मेकानिजम डेभलप गर्नु पर्यो त्यो मेकानिजमले पोलिसीमा भएको सर्टकमिङ छ कि इम्प्लिमेन्टेसनमा केही प्रब्लम छ कि त्यो एनालाइसिस गरेर त्यो फिडब्याक लिएर फेरि त्यहाँ कहाँनिर इम्प्रुभ गर्न सकिन्छ इम्प्रुभ गरेर यो बेनिफिट्सहरू सबैले पाउन सकिने किसिमबाट गर्नु पर्छ भने अब यो वुमेनहरूको क्यापेसिटी डेभलपमेन्टमा पनि त्यतिकै त्यो इनपुटहरू दिन सक्नु पर्यो कि बिजनेस डेभलपमेन्टको लागि थ्यांक यू
Sir Mahalakshmiji, you've touched on a lot of important things, one of them being accountability measures. And Akriti has been writing extensively in terms of the quota system, specifically in the political representation sector. So I wanted her to speak about her researches and everything that she's found out in the context of the quota system and the political representation that we have in our legislature, within our member of parliament and the ministries. How have things been like in your experience, Akriti ji?
So, quota system ko kura gardakiri, it's not working. That's basically the summary of my whatever I've read and written about. And that's also because let's start political parties but okay. अहिले भर्खर सबै political parties को महाधिवेशन भयो where they've elected their set of people for 5 years. But the thing is that they ensured 33% of people within their committees. But to mathiko office bearers, none of the political parties have minimum 33% पनि के. And even the law, it says that you need to have 33% timro political party member, doesn't mention anything about office bearers ko kura ke. And which is exactly what's happened in various mayor ko level ani yo sub-mayor upa-mayor ko level aruma ki where mostly it's men. There are only duita female who are gotten mayor ko position, and these women have made it there, but they've made it there only because त्यो दुईटा मध्ये एउटा हुनु पर्छ. So okay, सबभन्दा तल्लो चाहिँ women will get. अब त्यो हुँदाखेरि पनि हो त्यसमा if we talk about intersectionality, majority of it is taken by खास area women. Indigenous women को representation छैन, Muslim women को representation छैन, Dalit women को छैन, queer people को छैन. भनेपछि if we're proceeding with next election, which is going to start April बाट, how far ahead are we going to reach? अनि quota system को अर्को कुरा गर्दाखेरि I was talking with Dr. Poonam Yadav at UCL, and what she said was कि quota system has to be contextual भनेर. So if Madhya province if you're going and if you're trying to apply a quota system, then the majority of the population is going to be a Madhesi. You cannot say कि ल 80% चाहिँ खसारेले 80% चाहिँ मधेसीलाई. If majority of the population त्यहाँको मधेसी छ भने majority representation पनि त मधेसीको हुनु पर्यो नि त. So that way, perhaps that was something very novel to me, to think about contextualizing quota system based on geography, based on त्यहाँको location, based on the population भनेर. But then also you look at judiciary ma herदाखेरि पनि there is it's not sufficient and many women aren't there. And then we talk about laws. And I talked with a couple of lawyers in Nepal where one of them, she said that she faced harassment at her workplace. Kathmandu district court ma kaam garna jada, she was harassed. Now there is no place for her as a lawyer to go and say that she's been harassed. And when this Nepal Me Too movement ayo, and why did it fail भन्दाखेरि because these very lawyers who could bring any sort of policy changes were subjected to so much of harassment. How would they help in trying to provide justice to these women who've been harassed and violated? So every single administrative, bureaucratic, political system, judiciary system, women aren't safe. They don't have proper mechanisms where they're encouraged to proceed ahead. And then quota system ko kura gardakiri enough representation छैन. When you don't have proper representation, उहाँहरुको सबैको actual मुद्दा आउँदैन. काठमाडौँमा बसेको मान्छेले गोर्खामा बसेको मान्छेको मुद्दा ल्याउन सक्दैन। त्यो मैले मेरो साथीको कथा भनौँला तर उसको एक्चुअल इश्यूज त मैले भन्न सक्दिनँ नि त। त्यो भएपछि we will need these other people to come forth and speak their issues, but त्यो छैन। So overall, if we're looking at leadership, it's lacking both in numbers as well, but in त्यो sort of actual policies that these women should be able to bring forth। त्यो छँदै छैन because environment छैन, अघि महालक्ष्मीजीले भने जस्तो information छैन, access छैन। Yeah.
All right, thank you, Akriti-ji. And this brings me to Ajit-ji, at least in the context of women. At least we're starting this discussion. We have the supposed quotas for the women that allow for some form of protection to begin with. But when it comes to the LGBTQIA community, it is not even acknowledged in Nepal, and that is a fact, be it socially or be it politically. So, in the policy spectrum, Ajit-ji, what is something that can be done? What could be that first step? And in no way would I want to put that immense pressure on you. But the reason I ask you this question is because as much as we empathize, as much as we, want to bring up this agenda of intersectionality, your experiences are your own. And as much as we try, unless we have a vocal power from your community, it's not going to happen. So in your context, in your personal or professional opinion, how do you think we can move forward in terms of including the LGBTQIA community in the gender spectrum, which is absent in Nepal?
Yeah, पहिलो कुरा चाहिँ हामीले यो बुझ्नु पर्यो कि हाम्रो कम्युनिटीको भिजिबिलिटी एकदमै कम छ नेपालमा हैन। अनि त्यो भिजिबिलिटी कम भएको कारण चाहिँ पहिलो कुरा त हाम्रो बारेमा पाठ्यक्रमहरुमा पनि त्यति धेरै इङ्कित गरिएको छैन हैन। मैले आफै नै आफ्नो यौनिकताको, आफ्नो लैङ्गिक पहिचानको आदिको बारेमा मैले नेपाल छाडेपछि जति राम्रोसँग बुझ्न पाएँ त्यति मैले नेपालमा बुझेकै थिइनँ हैन। र मैले त्यही कुरालाई तुलना गर्ने हो भने विदेशमा पढेका केटाकेटीहरु मैले जहाँ पढिरहेको छु त्यो देशमा पढिरहेका केटाकेटीहरुलाई चाहिँ प्रायलाई चाहिँ धेरै थाहा छ हैन। किनकि त्यहाँको मिडियाको एक्सपोजर होस् कि हैन, पाठ्यक्रमले राम्रोसँग त्यहाँ समेटेको कुराहरु होस् हैन, त्यो कुराले गर्दाखेरि पनि हो। अनि अर्को कुरा हामीले पनि कसरी त्यो पोलिसी लेभलमा चाहिँ आफुलाई पुर्याउने हैन, त्यो भिजिबिलिटीलाई कसरी चाहिँ उत्थान गर्ने भन्ने खालको कुरा चाहिँ एउटा कुरा हामीले कसरी लानुपर्छ भन्दाखेरि एलजीबीटी कम्युनिटी वा यो यौनिक तथा लैङ्गिक अल्पसंख्यक समुदायको व्यक्तिहरु चाहिँ समाजलाई कुनै खालको थ्रेट हैन भनेर बुझ्नुपर्छ के। मान्छेले कुनै खालको व्यक्तिप्रति कुनै खालको धारणाप्रति वा कुनै खालको समूहप्रति चाहिँ उसको विरुद्धमा किन लाग्छ भन्दाखेरि उसको समाजले र चलिआएको परम्पराले चाहिँ उलाई चाहिँ एउटा थ्रेटको रूपमा पोर्ट्रे गरिरहेको हुन्छ हैन। र त्यो थ्रेटलाई चाहिँ हामीले इम्ब्रेस नकार्नु भन्दा पनि इम्ब्रेस गर्न सिक्यो भने चाहिँ हैन भिजिबिलिटी धेरै हुनेवाला छ। अनि साथसाथै यस्तै कन्भर्सेसन्सहरु जस्तै अहिले हामीले हजुरले अर्गनाइज गर्नुभएका कन्भर्सेसन्सहरु त्यस्तै खालको कन्भर्सेसन्सहरुले पनि अगाडि लाने हो हैन। चेन्ज त एकै दिनमा हुनेवाला छैन हैन। यो लामो समयको एउटा किसिमको वार्ता अनि त्यसपछि गएर बातचित अनि त्यसपछि गएर यस्तै खालका पोलिसी एजेन्डाहरुको कुराहरु गर्ने अनि त्यसपछि एडभोकेसी हैन, पिटिसन लबिङ अनि सबै काम सबै गरेर बिस्तारै हुँदै जाने हो। र बिस्तारै भइरहेको छ पनि। मैले 10 वर्ष अगाडि जति यौनिक तथा लैङ्गिक अल्पसंख्यक समुदायको व्यक्तिहरुलाई चाहिँ देख्थे हैन भिजिबिलिटी, त्यो चाहिँ अलि धेरै बढेर गएको छ। तर साथसाथै राजनीतिक पहुँच चाहिँ एकदमै कम छ। मलाई लाग्छ पहिलो कुरा त समाजमा सम्पन्न व्यक्तिहरु जो हुनुहुन्छ र यो समुदायमा आफुलाई आइडेन्टिफाई गर्नुहुन्छ ती व्यक्तिहरुले चाहिँ प्राय जस्तो नेपालमा बस्न भन्दा पनि नेपाल छाडेर जाम भन्ने खालको चाहिँ धेरै सोच छ हैन। किनकि त्यो खालको सोचले गर्दाखेरि पनि नेपालमा धेरै जनशक्ति नभएको पनि हो जस्तो लाग्छ मलाई हैन, यो समुदायका व्यक्तिहरु। अनि त्यसपछि गएर खुलेका व्यक्तिहरु जति पनि हुनुहुन्छ उहाँहरु चाहिँ नेपालमै भए तापनि उहाँहरु चाहिँ पढाइ अलि कम हैन वा त्यही खालको अलि सहज वातावरणमा नहुर्किनु भएको अनि सहज पारिवारिक सुविधा नभएको यस्तै कारणले गर्दाखेरि पनि चाहिँ उहाँहरु चाहिँ आफूलाई नै आफ्नै पहिचान पत्ता लगाउन आफ्नै अस्तित्व थाहा पाउन लागि भड्किरहनु भएको हुन्छ कि अनि त्यस कारणले गर्दाखेरि पनि धेरै अप्ठ्यारो परेको छ पोलिसी लेभलमा चाहिँ
Thank you, Aditya. And here we talk about a lot of different things, capacity building, we talk about accountability measures, we speak in terms of monitoring measures, in terms of the policies we already have. And this is an important discussion to have and to move forward. But, you know, that's all we can do. We plan on coming up with a policy brief, and that is the step forward. But I would like to ask our panel. Sorry, is there interference somewhere? Yeah, I would like to ask the panelists, you know, what can NPI do as an organization to improve and effectively empower the LGBTQIA community, women and men as well? Because when we're looking at intersectionalities, we're looking at men from underrepresented communities as well, which unfortunately we do not have a representation of today. So Mahalakshmiji, what would be your recommendation to us as NPI? What can we do better? And we would very much like this opportunity to learn. Over to you.
Thank you, Ishaji. Yeah, अब एनपीआईले गर्न सकिने कुरा भनेको केही कुरा त मैले अघि नै मेन्सन गरिसकेँ हाम्रो पोलिसीमा जुन किसिमको ग्यापहरू छ पोलिसीमा जुन किसिमको एड्रेस हुन नसकेका कुराहरू छ त्यो कुराहरूको अलिकति स्टडी गरेर अलिकति पोलिसीको इम्प्लिमेन्टेसनको बाटोमा पनि एज पर पोलिसी इम्प्लिमेन्टेसन गर्दाखेरि के कस्ता अप्ठ्यारो छ कसरी यसले के कारणले गर्दाखेरि यसले सबै टाइपको यो इन्टरसेक्सनलिटीलाई छुन नै सकेको छैन अनि त्यसलाई छुने खालको पोलिसीहरू एकदमै कम छ त्यो कुराहरूलाई चाहिँ नि अलिकति स्टडी गरेर अलिकति रिसर्च गरेर त्यसमा आएको रेकमेन्डेसनहरूलाई अब अलिकति पब्लिक प्राइभेट डायलग्सहरू पनि गर्न सकिन्छ अनि यो पब्लिकमा अवेरनेसहरू पनि क्रिएट गर्न सकिन्छ किनभने पब्लिक अवेरनेस क्रिएट गर्नु पनि एकदमै इम्पोर्टेन्ट हुन्छ पोलिसीमा चेन्जेसहरू ल्याउनको लागि अनि त्यो हाम्रो एनपीआईले यस्तो किसिमको कामहरू गर्न सकिन्छ अनि त्यो काम गरेर हामीले पोलिसीको लागि कहाँ कहाँ ग्याप छ त्यो चाहिँ नि पोइन्ट आउट गरिदिन सकिन्छ पोलिसीमा के चेन्ज ल्याउनु पर्यो अनि त्यस्तै अब त्यो पोलिसीलाई इम्प्लिमेन्टेसन गर्दाखेरि आउने अप्ठ्याराहरूमा पनि त्यो मोनिटर गरेर त्यहाँको पनि सर्टकमिङ्सहरूलाई एनपीआई जस्तो अर्गनाइजेसनहरूले पोइन्ट आउट गरिदिन सकिन्छ होला यसमा यस्तो एरियाजमा चाहिँ नि एनपीआई जस्तो अर्गनाइजेसनले धेरै कामहरू गर्न सकिन्छ जस्तो मलाई लाग्छ
Thank you, Mahalakshmiji. We will definitely keep that in mind moving forward with our agendas. And this brings me to Akriti-ji. You have been involved in NPI in one way or another. So what would you advise us to do? What is our way forward here?
I think one of the major things Agi Mahalakshmiji said about information, what I see is that people do not know what their laws are. People do not know what they can do and what they can't do. And there's this sort of vacuum that people are operating in. Traffic laws pani tha chaina, and then moreover rape laws pani tha chaina, what they can do, how they can behave kehi tha chaina. So first would be trying to see how are you going to communicate these things. Just a simple example, गाउँ घरतिर रेडियोमा बज्यो भने म्यान पावरको एड आउँछ के बढी एज अपोज टु एनी सोर्ट अफ अरू कुनै कम्युनिकेसन सो दे नो हु देयर टार्गेट अडियन्सेस दिज म्यान पावर्स होइन भनेपछि वाइ आन्ट नेपालको पोलिसी मेकर्स नेपालको लयर्स हुन्छ नि एडभोकेट्स नट बिङ एबल टु ट्याप इन्टु द्याट मार्केट ट्याप इन्टु द्याट सोर्ट अफ टेक्नोलोजी एन्ड ट्राइङ टु स्प्रेड अवेरनेस हुन्छ नि द्याट इज गोइङ टु बी मोर इफेक्टिभ नि त अनि वान इज अबाउट त्यो भयो अनि सेकेन्ड इज रिसर्च There is so little research that's done on so many things. Earlier, recently, I'm looking into Badi women in Nepal, and I'll be probably traveling soon to meet them. But just as I'm talking to a lot of women Badi community, they do rights guaranteed. There's no research that's done on them. Google, like I open Google Scholar. So on what basis am I going to say, okay, I want to go there and I want to bring their stories out? So that's there. And again, on the other hand, there's a lot of research that's been done on many sectors, but people don't know about this research. People don't know that people are actually working climate sector ma, amazing people working climate sector ma, social change sector ma, but and all of the research that this whole network, NPI ko network is producing, your research ko proper communication to the lay individual. So how are we going to address this sort of gap? And I think that what NPI can do is focus on bringing in this research together and communicating it to the public in the way that probably the most simple commonest man with the very basic level of education can understand those. Okay? So mostly it would be research and awareness and communication.
Thank you, Akriti ji. Before I go to Ajit ji, we see that there is a hand raised by Mansir Palji. So please, if you can, turn on your video and take the floor and ask the question, please.
I think I would ask later on after the panelist, conclude, right?
All right, thank you very much. We appreciate that. So that brings me to Ajit ji, and that is my final question. So after that, we would go into the question answer. So everyone, please be ready with your questions. I'm sure you have many. But Ajit ji, finally, what would you think NPI can do in the context of, trying to challenge that heteronormative idea that we have been, taking forward so far? What can we as a young institution do? What is our part to play? Please let us know.
आकृतिजी महालक्ष्मीजीले धेरै कुरा मेन्सन गरिसक्नुभयो होइन, रिसर्चको बारेमा, त्यसपछि इन्फर्मेसन ग्यापको बारेमा, अनि मान्छेहरू भ्याक्युममा बाँचिरहेको छ भनेर इन्फर्मेसनको। अर्को कुरा पनि के छ भन्दाखेरि मैले अलि 2-4 जना लैङ्गिक तथा यौनिक अल्पसङ्ख्यक समुदायका अभियन्ताहरूसँग कुरा गरेको छु नेपालमा। अनि उहाँहरूलाई चाहिँ सपोर्टको चाहिँ पोलिसी लेभलमा लबिङ गर्ने सपोर्टको चाहिँ एकदमै कमी छ होइन। लयर्सहरू हुनु हुँदैन उहाँहरूलाई सपोर्ट गर्न खोज्ने, लयर्सहरूले पनि बुझ्नु हुँदैन कि कति कुरा भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ उल्टो पाल्टो कुराहरू गर्नुहुन्छ होइन। अनि बुझे पनि अल्ल मल्ल पारामा बुझे जस्तो कुराहरू गर्नुहुन्छ। अनि त्यसपछि गएर प्राय जस्तो सबै चिज आफैले गर्नुपर्ने हुँदाखेरि चाहिँ धेरै कामहरू चाहिँ पोलिसी लेभलमा गर्नुपर्ने धेरै कामहरू चाहिँ आफैले गर्नुपर्ने कारणले गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ धेरै अप्ठ्यारो परेको छ होइन। जस्तै अब संस्थागत रूपमा चलिरहेका कुनै यौनिक तथा लैङ्गिक अल्पसङ्ख्यक समुदायका संस्थाहरू छन् भने त्यो संस्थाहरूले पोलिसीको लागि लबी गरिरहेको छ भने त्यो संस्थाहरूलाई हेल्प गर्ने होइन। अनि अभियन्ताहरू को छ, त्यो अभियन्ताहरूलाई चाहिँ रिच आउट गरेर मेबी उनीहरूलाई चाहिँ मागहरू कति राखेको छ, मागहरू के छ, त्यो कुराहरूमा छलफल गर्ने। अनि त्यसपछि गएर कसरी राजनीतिक र पोलिसी लेभलमा चाहिँ पुग्न सकिन्छ भनेर त्यो कुराहरू पनि त्यसको पनि बातचित गर्ने हो भने मलाई लाग्छ एनपीआईले त्यो कुरामा धेरै हेल्प गर्न सक्छ जस्तो लाग्छ।
Very much. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you very much. And me as a moderator, I have definitely learned so much from you, and my questions will probably never end. But, Manji has raised his hand, and I now yield the floor for questions. So, Manji, we will start with you. Please ask your question to whatever panelist you would like, or the panel as a whole. The floor is yours.
Yeah. So, thank you so much, Saji. I won't have the question actually for all the panelists, but I have a question to all of us actually, because we all are like basically influenced, I would say highly influenced because of patriarchal mindset, no matter how even we are individual or institutes. So at that level, I would have a question to like with this panelists because they have very much lot of experience how we better strengthen their capacities. When there is a question of capacities, yes, Akriti has already mentioned, and there is only two like mayors among 700 something more local governments they have already elected. So always we people, even women, and they have the mindset that women don't have much capacity to lead local government. So so I have a question now just triggered in my mind, that why we don't conduct such a policy dialogue at local levels? Like there are many ward president members, and then also mayor and deputy mayors and all those different stakeholders. If we conduct such a dialogue, I think that makes really more effective discussion that develops our capacity, the realization of their participation and leadership. And that is one question. I think API also can do further to include those different mayor, deputy mayor, or ward chairperson or members, so that discussion could harness the better result in future, because we are really close to our local government's elections. That is one point I would like to just make a question for all of you panelists as well as API. And then second question is, when we talk about the intersectionality, it is hardly heard the intersectionality word if we look at the overall discussion on the gender equality and social inclusion. Always been neglected those marginalized communities like Dalit, Madhesis, like Badi women, and many other marginalized communities. That is always been like overloaded by the leadership of Khas and Brahmin women on the name of woman, but actually the leadership of like Dalit woman and Badi woman and other marginal woman is really hard to see at the ground level as well as in their own governance system. So I think this question should not only be asked from myself. So this question should come from all of us, and that really needs to think stand. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Manji. That were very important points that were raised. Yes, we do not know about intersectionality. What even is that term? Very more so in the context of Nepal. So panelists, any takers to start this discussion that we've raised on creating this policy dialogue at a local level and intersectionality not being a thing in Nepal? How do we move forward? Anyone that wants to start can go ahead.
I can share something. So one of the things that many local leaders, and again, this is coming after talking to a lot of experts, what they said was the women who are working at local levels, they're always pushed to trainings, right? They're sent to trainings after trainings after trainings. And at this point, they're like, we're done with so many trainings. We just want to sit and work. Give us the environment where we can just sit and work. So when we talk about dialogues, are we talking again, keeping this bunch of women, okay, you are the ones who don't have the power, we're trying to empower you. So now, okay, you go do the work. Or do we actually sit down with all the members within the local unit and tell them, okay, this is how you support, this is how you help women, help marginalized community uplift. It's if you're thinking only women marginalized people dialogue, it's not going to work, because it's like saying ki, okay, timi chai kamjor chhau, timi chai यसरी राम्रो हो, but never addressing the actual systemic injustices that exist.
Thank you, Akriti ji. Could I also ask Mahalakshmi ji to speak about this, because you did mention on capacity building, as you said, we do not have the information. What can be done according to you to empower these women or empower people from the minority communities to give them that skill, that capacity to move forward and excel?
Main thing त अब women entrepreneursहरूलाई capacity building गर्ने भनेको उनीहरूलाई सोसियो इकोनोमिकली स्ट्रेन्थन गर्ने, इम्पावर गर्नको लागि नै हो हैन। यसको लागि अब हामीले एउटा काम चाहिँ के छ भने अब पोलिसी डायलग्स गर्दाखेरि हामीले यो हामी आफै एज अ सेन्ट्रल बडी एफविन फेडरेसनले पनि गर्छ, वुमेन एन्टरप्रेन्योरको फेडरेसनले सेन्ट्रल लेभलमा गभर्नमेन्टको रिलेटेड रेस्पेक्टिभ गभर्नमेन्टको बडिजहरुसँग राखेर पोलिसी डायलग्सहरु हामी गरिरहेका हुन्छौं भने हामीले यो अहिले त फेडरल सिस्टम आइसकेको छ। अनि हाम्रो च्याप्टरको वुमेन एन्टरप्रेन्योर्सहरुलाई पनि यो एडभोकेसी कसरी गर्ने, यो त इट्स अ प्रोसेस हो। एडभोकेसी भनेको एकचोटी गरेर पुग्ने कुराहरु होइन। हाम्रो पोलिसीमा चेन्जेसहरु ल्याउनलाई हाम्रो प्रब्लम के छ, तर आकृतिजीले भन्नुभयो जस्तो हामी आफै मात्र बसेर गर्ने पनि होइन। अनि फेरि हामीले एकचोटी लबी गरेर एकचोटी भेटेर एकचोटी त्यो हाम्रो पोलिसी पेपरहरूमा चेन्ज गर्नुपर्ने रिकमेन्डेसनहरू के दिएर मात्र पुग्दैन, त्यसलाई कन्टिन्युअसली लबी गर्नुपर्ने हुन्छ। यो जुन यो प्रोभिन्सियल लेभलको गभर्मेन्टलाई पनि गर्नु पर्यो, किनभने त्यहाँ अहिले त बजेट पनि त्यो प्रोभिन्सियल लेभलमा पनि एलोकेट गरिरहेको अवस्था हो हैन। त्यसैले हामीले त्यो लेभलको वुमन एन्टरप्रेन्योर्सहरूलाई पनि च्याप्टर लेभलहरूको सबैजना मिलेर के कुरामा तिमीहरूले एडभोकेसी गरेर के कुरामा उनीहरूको ट्रेनिङ्सहरू क्यापेसिटी बिल्डिङको प्रोग्रामहरू कसरी ल्याउन सक्छ हैन, पोलिसीमा के चेन्ज ल्याउन सक्छ, त्यो गर्नलाई पनि हामीले उनीहरूलाई अलिकति इम्पावर गर्छौँ हैन। त्यो ट्रेनिङ्सहरूबाट ती कुराहरूलाई पनि हामी इन्फर्मेसन पाउनको लागि पनि कसरी इन्फर्मेसन हामीले ल्याउने अनि त्यो हाम्रो आफ्नो ग्रुपमा त्यसलाई डिसेमिनेट पनि कसरी गर्ने त्यो इन्फर्मेसनहरूलाई, त्यो कामहरू पनि हामी गरिरहेका छौँ। अनि त्यो चाहिँ नि कन्टिन्युअस प्रोसेस गरि नै राख्नुपर्छ जस्तो लाग्छ। डिफ्रेन्ट टाइममा डिफ्रेन्ट पिपलहरूसँग हैन डिफ्रेन्ट पोलिसी चेन्जेसको लागि यो एडभोकेसी चाहिँ कन्टिन्युअसली गर्नुपर्ने प्रोसेस जस्तो लाग्छ मलाई, अनि त्यो गर्नुपर्छ जस्तो लाग्छ। थ्याङ्क यू।
Thank you, Mahalakshmiji. And finally, Ajitji, in this context of information and information not being out there that you've spoken so extensively about throughout this webinar, is there anything further you would like to add in this context in terms of action plans? We're all ears.
हाम्रो प्राय जस्तो आकृतिजी महालक्ष्मीजी दुईजनाले भनिसक्नु भएको छ, पोलिसिजहरू बनाइदाखेरि चाहिँ एउटै खालको ब्राह्मण खस आर्य व्यक्तिहरूले बनाएका छन् कि हैन। अनि ती व्यक्तिहरूले बनाएका पोलिसिजहरू स्ट्र्याटेजिजहरू चाहिँ महिलालाई पछि भनिएका कथित उनीहरूले बनाएका कथित पोलिसिजहरू चाहिँ महिलालाई भनेर पिछडिएका अल्पसंख्यक समुदायलाई भनेर बनाएका छन् कि हाम्रै समुदायको व्यक्तिहरूलाई इन्भल्भ नगराइकन ती पोलिसिजहरू बनाउँदाखेरि चाहिँ हाम्रो बारेमा उहाँहरूलाई कसरी थाहा हुन्छ त हैन। उहाँहरूलाई थाहा नै नभएका कुराहरू उहाँहरूले ल एउटा टोकनको रूपमा चाहिँ ल यिनीहरूलाई पनि इन्क्लुड गरेको छ भन्ने खालको भनाउँदो कुरा गरेर इन्क्लुड गरेर त हामीलाई कसरी त्यो सजिलो हुन्छ भन्नुहोस् त। त्यो सजिलो त हुँदैन नि हैन। पहिलो कुरा त भिजिबिलिटी हुनै पर्यो हैन। अनि जो व्यक्तिहरू हुनुहुन्छ जसले चाहिँ अगाडि आएर बोल्न सक्ने क्षमता छ, उहाँहरूले चाहिँ जो पढे लेखेको हुनुहुन्छ, जसले आवाज उठाउन सक्नुहुन्छ, ती व्यक्तिहरूलाई सबै प्रोत्साहन गर्नु पर्यो कि अगाडि आएर बोल्नको लागि। उनीहरूलाई एउटा बर्डन पनि गराइदिनु भएन, किनकि उहाँहरूको जिम्मा पनि होइन सबै गराएर सबै राम्रो गराउने। तर जो व्यक्तिहरू हुनुहुन्छ जसले अगाडि आएर बोल्न सक्नुहुन्छ, उहाँहरूले आफ्नो आवाजलाई उत्थान गर्न सक्नुहुन्छ, ती व्यक्तिहरूलाई चाहिँ सबै ढाडस दिनु पर्यो हैन। जसरी भए पनि उहाँहरूलाई पछाडि धकल्नु भन्दा पनि अगाडि कसरी सार्ने भनेर, किनकि केही हुनु नहुनु भन्दा पनि केही हुनु बेसी हो कि हैन। त्यही नै भन्न चाहन्छु म चाहिँ। धन्यवाद।
Thank you, Ajitji. And Gambhirji has reached out. He has a question. Gambhirji, over to you.
Thank you, Ishaji. Look, this has been a really worthwhile conversation for me to listen in on. I have a question for all three panelists. And in a way, if you can help contextual, I mean, you've already done a fair bit to help me understand the different strands of this particular issue. And I'm in New Zealand now, and before I had worked for the Asian Development Bank, I was a senior advisor in the New Zealand government. At that time in the New Zealand government, this was in the early 2000s, the Prime Minister was a woman, the leader of the opposition was a woman, the Governor General was the woman, the Chief Justice was a woman. And nobody really talked about a quota system for women or anything like that. It was just whoever was the most qualified was given an opportunity to be able to, demonstrate his or her ability to get the job done. So it sort of got me thinking about what is it about a society where we talk of, for example, empowering, as if it's the men that have always had the power and they're giving it to someone else. And that alone is a wrong narrative. It alone is the wrong starting point for you to say, oh, I've allowed you to do this. Nobody's allowing anybody to do this. You do whatever you think you can do and get the best out of it. But of course, I understand the context. I left Nepal when I was in my early 20s, and I've seen large parts of the world. And what I can probably say is that things are still going on slow speed in Nepal, to be honest. I know there have been phenomenal changes, don't get me wrong, politically and otherwise, but from what I can see, from what little I can see, it's still going slow. So which leads me to this question. In your own areas of work, and that applies to Malik's view with respect to the whole business sector and all that, and the entrepreneurship area, I could see in the work that you do with respect to both journalism and also other such endeavors that you have, and Ajit, with respect to the personal experiences that you've had, what is it that we can do at an individual level to make and to hope everybody else will come together and make a substantial societal effect, rather than just change one person? And in this one, I have a story. When Jimmy Carter was after he finished his presidency, he was working for Habitat for Humanity, and I think he was somewhere in Venezuela or Colombia, and they'd helped build 10 houses. And some reporter asked him, "What are you going to do with 10 houses? Do you know the scale of the homelessness problem in this country?" And Jimmy Carter said, "Well, at least there are 10 more houses now than what there were before. If everybody took their turn to do what little they could, things would improve." So, question to all three of you in your own little way, I guess, what is it that you can do in your own area? What is it that I can do in my area such that I make a qualitative difference in the way in which people think about the role, the gender roles, and the way in which think about how the other sex gets involved in this? Anyway, I hope you understood my question. Basically, what is it that we can do at an individual level without having to rely on the government or anybody else to tell us what to do? So that's my question. Thank you.
Can I answer? So that's a very good question, and it's like very well put together. I think one of the most important thing that individual can do is to like listen, I guess, when people of these communities are speaking. And I definitely agree with the fact that there's nothing that we have to take from cisgender heteronormative males, because they didn't give us anything in first place. But historically, because they have gotten so much opportunities because of the system that has been built, it's the problem doesn't lie in taking away from them. The problem lies in not acknowledging them and wanting to have more while leaving these people behind, so that is the big problem, I guess. And not trying to unlearn the things that we learned, Unlearning is definitely a big challenge, but at the same time, learning and unlearning goes hand in hand, For example, if I was a kid, I learned a certain way to tie my shoes, but growing up, according to the context and whenever I'm growing up, if I learn to tie my shoes in a different way, then I have to unlearn the way that I had learned to tie my shoes, So unlearning is a very important thing that everyone needs to do. And there's nothing wrong in loving people and letting people progress, because we've also been living in a system where we've been put too much pressure into like self-progress. We don't think about progress as a group, Although these big corporates and organizations, they're like, oh, sure, let's go and work together and progress. But most of it's like very Orientalist perspective, the whole West wanting to do something for these certain countries or certain group of people and communities in global South, like example of Jimmy Carter. So, but will Jimmy Carter question the fact that the problem that the US has created, or the problem that his white cisgender heteronormative ideas has created to other people? I don't know. I'll leave it to there.
Moving right along to our other panelists, if they'd like to add something.
Yeah. If I think from my level, like with my entrepreneurship journey and associating with FWE, what I would say is our bottom line is socio-economic empowerment of women through entrepreneurship. What I think is it will also help to bring changes in the society, because once the women are empowered economically, their status will change, and anybody's status will change, because this is the main objectives of what we are working. It can be through business supports, it can be through capacity development, it can be through advocacy or networking. Through different activities, we believe in empowering women entrepreneur, women of Nepalese women to entrepreneurship development. That is where we are working in that area. Thank you.
To Gambhir's question, I think there are a couple of things. First is that what I do at my personal level and professional level is whenever I choose people to interview, I make sure that I try to bring out voices that haven't been heard before. Say I try to find more women voices, experts bhanneko namma. Mostly if you look into article, it's usually men. And I don't want to do that. I make sure I try to find out, I put it up on my Instagram if anyone knows anyone. And then I make that extra effort in making sure that I bring other voices. I try to find queer voices as much as I can. And even when I do find queer voices, I try to reach out to people whose voices haven't been out there. It's like, हामीले मितिनी नेपालको नाम सुन्छ, Blue Diamond Society को सुन्छ, but there are many more people who are amazing, who are out there spoken. So it's at a personal level, I always do that extra work in any sort of writing that I try to do. Now, second is asking the relevant people the questions that have to be asked. Just about if I'm going and trying to do some research on Badi women, apparently there was a book Nathia, and there was this movie Pandit Baji Kolauri, which covered Badi women topics. But both of these art works were Badi people took offense to those works, and mudda pani lageko thyo. So for the fact that I made up a call and they just said, we're so glad that you called and asked about us, as opposed to just going and doing things blatantly. So it's about asking relevant people. And thirdly, it's also about gharkai, or even with friends and families. There's a lot of struggle that comes with making your friends understand why you're a Khas-Aryan individual and why you're privileged. Or trying to make them understand that it's a discussion that you're having. It's not a jhagada. So trying to establish that sort of mechanisms. And fourthly, just even for this panel, I know Ishaji and I, we tried to make it so inclusive. We tried so hard, and trying to call up people, bring more people, but we just failed. And we address that, we acknowledge that, but just that making these spaces, trying to find that every other space where you are going to be, where you are going to speak at, or where you're going to represent, or even friend circles, how do you make it more inclusive? I think these are the things that I do at a personal level, and also try to see what can be done with more of that.
Thank you, Akriti-ji. We see a couple of questions in the chat. Avash, would you like to pose your question directly to the panelists? If not, I can read your question out as well.
You can go ahead, Isha. That's okay.
All right, thank you. So to our panelists, the question is, how does the landscape of diversity and inclusion policies in Nepal look like in your organizations? Is there something of a concept of intersectionality? So that goes about business to Mahalakshmi-ji, journalism and media to Akriti-ji, and just general research in the context of Ajit-ji. Over to you.
The simple answer is China. Journalism happen, if you look at, not many media houses have their whole policies on intersectionality. Let's even forget about intersectionality. Okay? Gender representation happen China. Look at all the major media houses. Okay, oil in Nepali Times, we have 2 women editors out there, but body the China. And it's like, as I work, I realize how much of, say, as a reporter, I'm working, but then of course, because we have a lot of cishet men who bring a certain perspective, article editing pani त्यही हिसाबले गइदिन्छ नि त. So that means that you need to have diverse people all across, and everyone knows that, but China. And as much as we will report on these issues, but our organization with China, and it's hypocritical. But then, yeah, I think that's what the reality is. And also another very, very interesting thing is, I don't know how many of you are updated with the current Paul Shako case, and I'm following it very closely. And what's happened is he's been accused by a minor of raping him of statutory rape. Well, your case, ma, so many media houses have blatantly used the minor's name, which is against the law. There was this whole media channel where the minor's lawyer was present, and it was a live telecast. And one of the panelists there constantly used the minor's name against the law in front of public live television. So what do we do? Who is going to hold all of these people accountable? So if we're asking about your policies, China, we're failing really, really badly.
Moving right along to Aditi, in the context of research, how much of intersectionality have you come up with?
Intersectionality त्यति धेरै छैन आकृतिले भनेको जस्तै हैन हुन त गरिदै पनि छ यस्तै खालका कन्भर्सेसन्सहरुले बाट नै सुरु हुने हो प्राय जसो चीजहरु त हैन बारम्बार फोरममा रिपिट भइरहेकै छ हैन अलरेडी ऐतिहासिक रूपमा सुविधा सम्पन्न तहमा रहेका व्यक्तिहरुले नै यी खालका पोलिसीहरु बनाइरहेका छन् र कुनै सिस्टममा हामीले मैले सुरुमा भने जस्तै कुनै सिस्टमलाई च्यालेन्ज गर्ने हो भने त्यो सिस्टममा रहेर र त्यो सिस्टमले बनाएकै पोलिसीमा रहेर चाहिँ त्यो सिस्टमलाई चाहिँ कहिले च्यालेन्ज गर्न सकिदैन के हैन महात्मा गान्धीले एकताका भने जस्तै इभल र दुष्ट सँग चाहिँ लड्नका लागि चाहिँ दुष्टलाई साथ नदिने हो भने बल्ल दुष्टले हार खान्छ उलाई साथ दिइराख्ने हो भने चाहिँ उले झन् बलियो हुन्छ हामीले भनेको चाहिँ सिस्टमलाई फलो गरिराख्यो भने त्यही सिस्टमले नै झन् बढावा पाएर त्यही सिस्टममा हामी झेलिनु पुग्छौं र त्यो सिस्टमलाई चाहिँ कसरी सिस्टमबाट बाहिर आउने त्यो सिस्टम जस्तै हेटेरोनर्मेटिभ सिस्टम होस् वा हैन क्यापिटलिस्ट सिस्टम होस् एक्सट्रिम कर्पोरेटाइज सिस्टम होस् जुन सिस्टमहरु टक्सिक हुँदै जान्छ नि त्यो सिस्टमबाट कसरी बाहिर आउने त्यो कुरा चाहिँ कन्भर्सेसन्सहरु र एडभोकेसीहरुबाट नै हुन सक्छ र एलजीबीटीक्यू समुदायमा त मैले जाने अनुसार चाहिँ त्यति धेरै इन्टरसेक्सनल छैन पनि हैन पहिलो कुरा त भिजिबिलिटी नै नभएको कारणले गर्दाखेरि पनि प्रब्लम छ र बिस्तारै हुँदै पनि छ म अप्टिमिस्टिक छु थ्यांक यू
Thank you, Aditi. And finally, Mahalakshmiji, was there a concept of intersectionality in terms of building your business? Is there anything right now? Over to you.
यसलाई मैले एड्रेस गर्नुपर्दाखेरि चाहिँ नि अब एकदम कन्क्रिटली यो इन्टरसेक्सनालिटीलाई एड्रेस गर्ने किसिमको हाम्रो पर्सनल बिजनेसमा पनि छैन अनि अर्गनाइजेसनमा पनि हामीले गर्दाखेरि यो टर्मलाई त्यति गरेका छैन तर हामीले हाम्रो अब एफविनको बोर्डलाई पनि अलिकति इन्क्लुसिभ गर्नलाई चाहिँ हामी खोज्छौं किनभने हाम्रो बोर्डमा पनि हाम्रो एकदमै रुरल एरियाको वुमेनहरुलाई पनि राखेर उनीहरुलाई पनि अलिकति एक्सपोजर दियो भने इनपुट दिन नसके पनि एक्सपोजर त पाउँछ नि त उनीहरुले त्यो किसिमको अन्डरस्ट्यान्डिङ छ तर अब एक्ज्याक्टली यो डिफरेन्ट सेक्सुअल ओरिएन्टेसनको कुराहरु चाहिँ हाम्रो लागि पनि अलिकति नयाँ कुरा जस्तै छ फ्र्याङ्कली भन्दाखेरि यो कुरालाई हामीले कन्सिडर गरेको छैन अहिलेसम्म अब यो राख्नुपर्छ भन्ने कुरा यस्तै फोरममा बाट लर्न गरेर यस्तै पब्लिक डायलग्सहरुबाट सुनेर अवेयरनेस लेभललाई अलिकति इन्क्रिज गरेर अझ मोर इन्क्लुसिभ बनाउने चाहिँ नि हामी गर्न सकिन्छ यसको लागि अझ बढी डायलग्सहरुको इम्पोर्टेन्स छ जस्तो मलाई लाग्छ तर अब एन्टरप्रेन्योरशिपमा पनि कस्तो हुन्छ भने अब हाम्रो कुनै प्रोग्रामले चाहिँ सकेसम्म ग्रासरुट लेभलकै मान्छेहरुलाई टार्गेट गरेर प्रोग्राम जान्छ तर कहिलेकाहीँ के हुन्छ भने एकदम ग्रासरुट लेभलको मान्छेहरुलाई हाम्रो प्रोग्राम्सहरुले पनि छुन सक्दैन किनभने उनीहरु समहाउ ग्रासरुट लेभलमा उनीहरु एक्सक्लुडै भइदिन्छ के हामीले गर्न खोज्दाखेरि पनि कसैलाई इन्क्लुड गर्ला किनभने एन्टरप्रेन्योरशिप भन्दा बित्तिकै उसले टाइम दिन सक्नु पर्यो हैन उसले अलिकति भए पनि अब टाइममा ट्रेनिङमा त एटलिस्ट आइदिन सक्नु पर्यो प्रोग्राममा पार्टिसिपेट गर्नको लागि उनीहरु यस्तो बिजी भइदिन्छ कि कहिलेकाहीँ उनीहरु त्यो टाइम दिनै नसक्ने कि अब उनीहरुको लागि स्पेशली डिजाइन गर्न प्रोग्राम डिजाइन गर्न अरूलाई पनि गाह्रो हुन्छ कि उनीहरुलाई नै ल्याउने भनेको स्पेशल टार्गेटेड प्रोग्राम चाहिने हुन्छ उनीहरुको निड अनुसार गर्ने त्यो चाहिँ एक्ज्याक्टली जहिले पनि गर्न नसकिराखेको अवस्था हो तर यसमा चाहिँ अझ अवेयरनेस क्रिएट गरेर सकेसम्म धेरैलाई इन्क्लुसिभ बनाएर हामीले कार्यक्रमहरु गर्यो भने गर्न सकिने ठाउँहरु छ अनि इम्प्रुभ पनि गर्नुपर्छ जस्तो मलाई लाग्छ थ्यांक यू
Thank you, Mahalakshmiji. Over to Gambhirji to address the audience, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Shashi. I do need to respond to a query that one member of the audience has had on NPI's communication strategy, outreaching mechanism, and so on. And I was actually planning on having that as a separate conversation, but the person does have a valid point about, a question being raised at this panel and what is it that NPI has in mind. Basically, her question that she copied to everybody was about want to know more about NPI's outreach mechanism at the institutional level in reaching out to a diversified set of stakeholders. Look, basically the way I mean NPI, I'm the executive director of NPI, so I think I should speak for the organization. The intent is to make sure that we get into topics that we feel are relevant for the particular policy at hand. Now, by our name, the mandate that we have is to sort of look at issues that at a policy level, not necessarily at an operational level, but more thinking about what is it that's happening in the country and what is it that will have an implication for how governments will eventually come up with different policies. Now, in this particular case about this particular session, of course, the intent was to reach out to as many people as you could find, given that it's a Sunday and because we have an international audience and trying to find the right time slot to get everybody, all the speakers on board has always been a difficult task for us because we have, colleagues that join from the US and those like me who are from New Zealand and Europe. If you try to encompass all those time zones, you're going to have a really hard time trying to find someone who can make that time to come in. But the intent is for all practical purposes to reach out to make sure that we identify who are the most not important, relevant stakeholders in this part of particular conversation, find out if they're willing to talk about it in public, find out if they have the time to do so, and then to reach out and see how many other such colleagues we can bring together. And the number of participants has nothing to do with the enormity and the significance of the topic. I'll be honest with you, when I was with the Asian Development Bank, I used to say this all the time. I'd rather have 10 people who are really keen and interested in talking about the subject than have 100 people, 90 of them would then be in there with their video turned off and their sound turned off and who knows what they're doing. I'd rather have the really dedicated, involved, having colleagues having intimate conversations rather than just numbers. So the way we see it, it's a function of finding the right topic to talk about, looking at the policy implications of it, which is why, as you will see, this conversation is more at a certain policy level. There are operational issues as well that we discussed, but every now and then you do need to talk about those too. But the intent is, of course, then to reach out as many institutions as we can. That's something that the Institute has always been looking for. So that sort of explains the context in which this was happening. Thank you, Shashi, for letting me explain this in some way. And again, as I said, I'm happy to have a separate conversation with Ravinji if you're interested in how we can do things better, because we're always very interested in hearing about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Gambhirji. I would like to end with Khagendriji's question. So before that, I'd like to give the floor to Bisheshji, if that's okay. Please, Bisheshji, state your question.
First of all, thank you so much for such an insightful discussion. I had majorly two questions with respect to the things that came out here for discussion today. One point when Mahalakshmiji was answering to a particular question about that woman basically not attending training programs and all. There are two narratives and two questions that I would like to ask with respect to the same. Firstly, when we say that empowered women, we basically picturize some idea of an empowered woman in our head. But oftentimes we do not ask the question to the woman whether they really want to be what our version of empowered is. Is an empowered woman just someone who is an entrepreneur? Why a woman just who wants to be a housewife cannot be a housewife? Should we push our narrative towards them? And secondly, another question that I would like to ask is, whenever we are framing policy at the bureaucracy, most of the times I have noticed that it's always been a question about how conveniently you can float a policy. it's not majorly been about how inclusive it could be. So when we say that when we are not able to include these women, I think there are several hurdles these women face at their respective homes. Their husbands might not allow them. They might have their children. They might have their own responsibilities. So is it because the bureaucracy is operating in this unitary fashion without coordination with other bureaucratic bodies due to which these issues arise? Or is it because the planning or implementation phase itself is not designed in a way to include these women because it's too difficult or something? So this was the first part of my question. The second part of my question is with respect to Akriti's point on reservation. As you correctly stated, that how this quota system has actually failed in Nepal. There was a similar concern that happened in India as well once. When India was being independent at that time, there was huge caste issue going on in India. Bhimrao Ambedkar was basically trying to see that how basically we can represent these people who are these excluded caste groups in the Indian polity. So he recommended that at any stage, whenever someone is elected, like a leader, he or she has to cater to the interest of the people who is voting for him or her. So let's say even if a woman stands up today for an election, is it only the interest of women that she's representing, or she has to cater to this large mass of males and various other business interests and various other interests? So in reality, even if a woman is elected through a quota system, will she win the next election just on the basis of furthering the interest of a woman? And I believe that's not very easy to do, because if you want to win in the next election, you will have to take into consideration the views, the opinions of other sections of the society who is voting for that particular woman, despite there being a quota system. So is this quota system a very useful idea that could be modeled in some way to make women's representation better? Or is it something that just you believe is to normalize that women can also lead in the society? Because I see it only latter as being successful at this context. So these are my two questions.
Mahalakshmiji, over to you. Yeah.
Thank you, BCSG, for your question. Firstly, अब मैले भन्नुपर्दाखेरि कुनै कुनै प्रोग्रामले हाम्रो ग्रासरुट लेभलको वुमेनहरू सबैलाई समेट्न नसकेको सन्दर्भमा अब हामीले पनि रियलाइज गरेका छौँ, किनभने त्यो प्रोग्राम एक्चुअली जो वुमेन एन्टरप्रेन्योरले उनीहरूको हाउस होल्ड वर्कमा अरू वर्कमा टाइम दिनलाई उनीहरू रेडी छ, अनि यो एन्टरप्रेन्योरशिप उनीहरूको प्रायोरिटीमा पर्दैन भने त्यो वुमेनहरू त्यो कारणले गर्दाखेरि पनि त्यो प्रोग्राममा सहभागी नभएको हुनसक्छ। अनि अरू कुरा उनीहरूको अब फ्यामिलीको बच्चाहरू भएको कारण, एज यु मेन्सन अलरेडी, होइन, फ्यामिलीमा उसको फ्यामिलीतिर भएको अब्लिगेसनलाई उसले प्रायोरिटी दिएको कारणले पनि हुनसक्छ, प्रायोरिटी एकदम दिनुपर्ने अवस्था पनि हुनसक्छ उसलाई। ती डिफ्रेन्ट कारणले गर्दाखेरि उनीहरू सर्टेन प्रोग्राम्सहरूमा पार्टिसिपेट हुनलाई गाह्रो हुन्छ। जस्तो कि अब हुन त अब ग्रासरुट लेभल वुमेनहरूको कुरा गर्नु भन्दा पनि अगाडि कुनै पनि वुमेनले यो बाहिरको काम गर्छ नि, एन्टरप्रेन्योरशिप भनौँ अथवा इकोनोमिक जेनेरेसनको कामहरू गर्न बित्तिकै उनीहरूको बर्डन चाहिँ नि डबल त भइ नै हाल्छ, किनभने अहिलेसम्मको यो सोसाइटल माइन्डसेटले वुमेनहरूलाई यो घरभित्रको कामबाट कम्प्लिटली बाहिर निस्कन उनीहरू आफै पनि सकेको छैन, उनीहरूलाई त्यो दिएको पनि छैन। डबल बर्डन त अलरेडी देयर फर एभ्री वुमन हु वर्क्स आउटसाइड, होइन, त्यो त छँदैछ। तर त्यो बाहेक पनि अब हाम्रो डिफ्रेन्ट वुमेनको डिफ्रेन्ट प्रब्लम्सहरू त हुनसक्छ। कसैको अब घरको टाइमले उसको टाइम बढी डिमान्डिङ गरेको टाइम पिरियड हुनसक्छ, अनि ऊ आउन नसक्ने कारणहरू हुनसक्छ। कहिलेकाहीँ त हामीले ट्रेनिङहरू गर्दाखेरि अब 9 बजे हामी आउनै सक्दैनौँ भन्ने कुरा गर्छ कि 10 बजेसम्म आउन सक्दैन, अलिकति ढिला भयो भने हामी घरको कामहरू सकाएर हामी ट्रेनिङमा पार्टिसिपेट गर्न सक्छौँ भन्ने पनि उनीहरूको डिमान्ड हुन्छ। हामीले त्यो प्रोग्रामहरू गर्दाखेरि उनीहरूको निड अनुसार त्यो कामहरू गर्न सकिन्छ। तर कम्प्लिटली अब सबै एड्रेस गर्न चाहिँ हामीले अहिले सकेका छैनौँ, होइन, नसकेको कुरालाई अब हामी गर्छौँ भन्न पनि सकेको छैन। तर अहिले डिफ्रेन्ट काइन्डको प्रोग्रामहरू यस्तो भन्नु पर्यो कि जसले त्यस्तो एकदमै ग्रासरुट लेभलकोहरूलाई पनि ल्याउन सकिने खालको प्रोग्रामहरू डिजाइन गर्न चाहिँ आजको निड हो जस्तो लाग्छ, जसले गर्दाखेरि सबैलाई धेरै कुरामा इन्क्लुड गर्न सकोस्, सबैलाई त्यो लेभलको अवेरनेसहरू डेभलप गर्न सकोस् जस्तो चाहिँ मलाई लाग्छ। हस्, थ्याङ्क यू।
Thank you, Mahalakshmiji. And for the final question that was posed to Akritiji about quota system and political representation is also in line with Khagendraji's question. So For the final question of today, Akriti, over to you.
I'll try to answer as much as I can. So I absolutely agree with what Bisheshji said when he said that, or they, I don't know your pronouns, I'm sorry. When he said that women will have to cater to the larger mass as well, because they will have to represent all the voices who have voted for her. But then also, as he said, that this has only been used as a tool to normalize, but we will have to normalize, because until and unless their presence there isn't normalized, their presence isn't accepted, quote unquote, because that's what the reality is, I don't think we'll be able to move ahead past that, because say, theory my leadership ko definition duita cha, substantive or descriptive. So when we talk about substantive representation, it's basically just based on numbers. Only we're on that. We are trying to push forth for numbers as much as we can. Maybe we're not achieving the way that we want. Descriptive representation, which translates into policies, which translates into debates, having things being gender inclusive. Maybe we haven't reached it, but without having this sort of numbers ko guaranteed we won't be able to move ahead. They will, if it's only these cis-het upper caste men, mostly, which it is dominatingly, they will never understand the issues that we go through. And say, yeah, I think what was Khagendraji's question? How much reservation and proportionality policies? So it's like, I'm not completely aware on this. I'm trying to educate myself as much as I can, but then there's also this whole bigger politics that's being played against very capable women, which is that women are very capable women are being pushed to sent through these sort of competitions where I'm not being able to frame this correctly, but like they're being pushed through this sort of competition where they will lose out because there's men there. And then now suddenly, because you need to fill out the numbers, they justify that these women have failed, so they can't move ahead. And then here again, in order to fill in this sort of quota, men mostly bring in their relatives, their women that they know of, and they're just, and one of the female leaders, she called them pocket women. So women that you could easily manipulate. So it's like, yeah, reservation is there, but it's not functioning really well. And even in the case of Madhesi women, and this is what my Madhesi friends have said, that it's only people who have this sort of network who are out there. Okay? So yeah, sure, you have quota, but your true representation, how are you going to do it and how is it going to happen? I have no idea. But I think one other thing that I wanted to address was when Bisheshji posed this question of who is an empowered woman, who can ask this question? We can ask this question because we have this sort of agency. We have this language. How are you going to be independent? That is their priority. They don't care about all they care about is having that sort of economic freedom. So us asking this question probably to women who've had this exposure, women who've had this sort of knowledge, yes, that makes sense. But I think that I don't want to pose that question to those women at this point of time. But yeah.
Thank you, Akriti ji. And that is a very nice segue for me to call an end to this program. I would like to start by saying that feminism is a choice. Intersectionality falls under feminism. And together with feminism and intersectionality, we're working towards getting that gender equality that we've all been striving for, be it in a local level, be it in a national level, or be it in an international level. Having said that, I would very much like to thank our panelists for their time, for sharing their experiences, to our audience for being receptive, being open-minded, and asking the very much needed questions, and also to NPI for giving us this platform. Having said that, I would very much like to acknowledge that intersectionality is absent in this webinar. We tried our level best to get people to have them be represented here and not speak for them, but that did not happen. And that is a very big learning experiences for us in itself. So that's it. We start the dialogue and then we move forward from there. And we very much hope that, this is a discussion that we will keep having. This is not once in a kind of a thing, because it's March, let's talk about women's issue and gender equality. Let's start by saying it's not women's issues. It is a social issue, not even a gender construct. So let's start there. And before I finally conclude this webinar, being very mindful of the time, could I ask everyone to turn on their cameras for very split seconds so we can capture this moment, please? All right, if anyone else could turn on their cameras, we'd be very grateful. If not, we will take a picture anyway. Yeah, perfect, thank you. All right, then Avinashji, whenever you're ready, just let me know. All right, that's it. Thank you very much for your time. Please look forward to our press release and the policy brief that will follow. The discussion will keep going. Thank you so very much for all of your times. And that is it. This is the webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.